Well, welcome to Menlo Midweek, everyone. My name is Mark. And before you go, Adam here is going to tell you 3 ways you might be hearing wrong from God that he's going to help you fix. So let's welcome Adam.
No pressure at
None.
all. Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm so excited to just dig into the sermon a little more. And each piece that we're going to talk about were literally things as I was like working on my sermon, like, man, I wish I had I don't know, 8 minutes to go more into this. So let's do it. The first thing we talked about was to really get out of the whirlwind. You have to let go of your grip on noise. And so I'd love to get into that a little more. I was just talking with Lisa over here a second ago. Like, my wife is probably watching this and she's like, yeah, right. Yeah. Like, easier said than done. We have 3 small kids at home. My wife is a kindergarten teacher right now. She does, she's just doing everything all the time. So I'd love to just talk about, like, how do we let go of our grip on noise, and especially in a pandemic time where our phones are a great source of like the good distraction, right? Like they help us. So I'm curious with you, like, how have you had a hard time like letting go, whether it's phone or noise, distraction?
Well, we've talked about this a lot. There'll be times where Missy and I'll text you and say, hey, there was just no talking for the last 30 minutes and my house is quiet. And I know you haven't experienced that in years with kids and talks and all of that. But still, even with that, we still struggle sometimes to find silence. Yeah. I think silence and distraction can a lot of times go hand in hand, at least for me, where even if I do have the opportunity to sit in silence, I will purposely distract myself by either putting something on in the background, listening to music, maybe just doing some task, because I don't want to sit in whatever I'm trying to distance myself from.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. You're right. And silence for a lot of us can be super uncomfortable. Yeah. And for many, I've got a friend who told me one time she does not want to be in silence. She wants to be doing stuff because of her anxiety and the voices that she hears. And I think with silence, it's important to remember it is a practice. You can't go from no silence, distraction all the time to 5 days fully silent. That would be horrible. As a practice, I think some steps people can take are just setting some simple boundaries for each day of 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. I'm not going to do my phone, or whatever the time period is. I'm not going to do a podcast. I'm just going to do silence, and maybe I'll walk around or something like that. So I think that would be the first thing I'd say is do a small step and practice it. Do it for a couple of months. I'm going to take a 10-minute walk without headphones every day for 2 months. That's good. And then maybe I'll do 30 minutes. So I think that's a great point. It's super hard, but we can get better at it.
It's hard to do it unintentionally.
I think
there's some piece of it where silence at this point in life is just, you have to be intentional about it, because so much noise from everywhere else. So that's a great, action step from this message is, okay, maybe set a calendar reminder in your phone if you do use a calendar. I know that you don't. But for those of us that do use calendars, set a 5-minute window where you turn your phone on silent and you just go walk outside or enjoy your coffee or just in silence. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I think that's great. And this is why we're doing our series right now, is to practice. Spiritual practices are training us to be closer to God. Yep. So we talked about let go, and then the second one is leaving, withdrawing. And the first thing I want to make a note of, we're not talking about avoidance.
Okay. It's a good distinction.
Especially with all that's going on in our world, there can be a temptation to just avoid and escape. It's not escapism. It's actually, Richard Rohr has this place basically where he mentors and disciples people. And I love it because it's called the Center for Contemplation and Action. It's not it's not one or the other. It's we contemplate and we go in times of solitude so that we can hear from God and we can act and we can be in the community. So I just wanted to say that. But I think for leaving, the key is we have to do solitude times, like real alone times. And that's also just super hard. Is that hard for you at all?
It absolutely is. One thing that Missy and we've been practicing is we will try to Sabbath. And growing up, Sabbath, I thought was just an excuse not to do something on Sunday.
Totally.
But I read this book recently where it just kind of flipped that. And it said, Sabbath is anything that you can see as rest and worship. And so from sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night, we intentionally try to put all technology away. Besides a movie, we've been running through Marvel movies. So we've been going through that as just kind of a way to connect with each other, as well as, I don't know what else is going on. But we feel like not only will that help us recharge and refresh, but it will actually change our perspective of what we're going through throughout the week. Like that moment of pulling away will gear us up for kind of change our perspective on, okay, now going into this week, do I really need to schedule all these meetings back to back?
Right.
Do we really have to, do this, and that? And so I feel like one of the unexpected things that we've learned from that is how by retreating into silence, it can refrain how we see when we're not in silence.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great way to look at it. And I think, again, we talked about Jesus in the sermon. He's the perfect example, obviously. Like he changed the world, started a revolution. We see all the things he did,
right?
But also we often neglect to see that he retreated as well. He withdrew.
Yes.
It's like there's some kind of flow that can happen when we learn how to rest, when we learn how to spend time and commune with God. We get the power of it.
That's so good. And what's interesting about that too is that's often just a sentence or two, like Jesus retreated or Jesus went off.
Right.
And then we get, paragraphs on what he did after that. Right. But really, a lot of that work was done in that sentence or two that was skipped over.
Yeah. And I think that's super important for Silicon Valley. We're very driven, achievement focused. Maybe to flip it in your mind of like, I'm not retreating to escape again or to not. I'm retreating because as I rest, as I focus on God, I'll actually be able to live more fully with him.
That's great.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. The third one is we talked about jazz. And I love this piece because how we hear from God, so many people want to hear like a map, a roadmap of like, God will speak to me and give me a clear path. And I want to briefly talk about the difference between getting a map and sheet music versus jazz, which is about kind of listening with your soul.
Okay.
And I'm a hippie kind of guy, so it makes sense to me. But like, does that throw you off at all? You being a J on the Myers-Briggs, is that?
A little bit. I mean, I do like jazz music, but at some points it just sounds like noise to me.
Totally, dude.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah. And I think, again, this is where the practice piece really takes place. Because I talked about, for me, this most happens in the morning journaling.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, like I personally have never heard a verbal voice of God just saying something.
Yeah.
I know some people have, that's great. I just haven't. But as I'm journaling, what I'm hearing is a whisper. I'm hearing these threads. And as I journal and I look back, I'm realizing I'm actually learning how to tune my heart to what God is trying to teach me. And so I think there's a practice element to this.
Yeah.
And last thought on this, like jazz players can hear what you can't hear because
that feels offensive.
You said it. Because you haven't spent hours and hours and hours playing jazz and learning, right? I think it was Louis Armstrong said, if he didn't practice one day, he would know it. If he didn't practice 2 days, the critics would know it. If he didn't practice 3 days, the public would know it.
Interesting.
So just the importance of practice being locked in, is how they listen so well and they can move and groove.
Wow.
And so it's like, that's the big takeaway here is if you want to hear and listen to the whispers of God, you're not just going to get it one time of solitude. It's going to take a lot of time tuning your ear to him.
Do you feel like by tuning your ear, because let me preface this with, at the beginning of this, you said to hear from God. And then you made a distinction of what hearing from God looks like to hear then whispers of God. Is there some nuance there where after you practice, hearing from God might look like different ways? Or can you walk us through what whispers can be?
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean by listening with your soul.
Okay.
Is a lot of times, and this gets a little, obviously we'd love for it to be more concrete.
Right.
But oftentimes with God, he is a supernatural, spiritual, divine being in presence. And so it's not super concrete, it's nuanced. I love that. And it's ability to see in each moment, God might be speaking to you and guiding you and directing you to a decision or a way to act.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel like kind of all three of those things can go hand in hand.
Yeah,
And
totally.
if it's not even, it might even be like linearly, like, okay, in order to tune our souls into listening to that, first we must be in tune with our souls. And to do that, we must do so in silence.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Cool. Well, thanks for letting me
No
join
problem.
the Menlo midweek.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you soon.
See ya.